Greetings, loyal viewers, and welcome back. And in continuing from my review from Spyro 1, let's go ahead and go straight on to its sequel, Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. But before we do that, it only seems fair to give a little background for this one as well. In fact, I dare even say at this point it's kind of inevitable. The first game released in September of 1998 to critical acclaim and of course making a lot of money for Sony and Insomniac Games. So much so that Insomniac, now saved from bankruptcy after Disruptor, began work almost immediately after the first game's release on a sequel that would overcome its predecessor by leagues and bounds. And that game was of course Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage, or Gateway to Glimmer if you live in the UK. Of all the games I owned growing up, and I did own quite a few of them, this is the one I played the most, and it's also where my most fond love for the whole franchise comes from. But why? What is it about this game that makes it truly amazing? Well, there's only one way to find out. So, let's go ahead and kick off with Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. The game begins, once again, in the world of dragons, where we see Spyro, now voiced by Tom Kenny, who funny enough also does the voice of SpongeBob. But what's even funnier is not only did SpongeBob air the exact same year that this game came out in 1999, but that Tom Kenny also voices a group of world inhabitants of this game that we'll get to in a minute. Anyways, the game takes place shortly after the first game, at least somewhere I think, where Spyro is getting tired of the dang rain that he wants some good relaxing fun. So, he goes through a portal to Dragon Shores, only to instead be taken to the world of EVAH, where we meet a group of new colorful characters. First, there's Allura, the level-headed fawn, Hunter, the athletic yet mostly cowardly cheetah, and the bumbling but good-hearted professor. No, really, that's just what they call him. They just call him the Professor. I don't know either. After a somewhat awkward moment of confusion on both sides, we're then introduced to the fan-favorite villain of the franchise, Ripto, and his lackeys, Crush and Gulp. After a rather funny little moment with Ripto getting zapped, him accidentally getting swiped by Crush, and Gulp eating his scepter, they leave. Okay then. Right before we begin our adventure, Allura briefly tells us of what's been going on, alongside giving us a guidebook to help us on our journey before following Ripto and leaving us to find our own way from there. And thus, the adventure begins. Oh, I think I have such a nostalgia boner right now. I'm also happy to follow that up with saying that this is an amazing first level, arguably the best one in the entire trilogy. It's big, fun, colorful, lets you know that backtracking is definitely a thing in this game more so than in the first one, and that the enemies, much like in the first game, also allow you to ease up to the game's controls very quickly, which I'm also happy to say feels even better in this game than it did in the first. They're tighter, and the environments are still beautifully built around this playstyle. Also, the music! Yeah, this is one of my favorite gaming soundtracks of all time. I'd give you more previews for all of them, but we would be here all day if I did that. But the big thing that makes this game more fun and even somewhat more engaging than the first game is the introduction of challenges. And most of them are pretty fun. Okay, they're not phenomenal, and much like the first two challenges here, where you simply fly around and light up gem lamps twice, with one that requires the aforementioned backtracking, and I'll elaborate more on that one as we go on, and where you spit rocks to kill these little gem-eating lizards. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the other challenges do get better and better as you progress, mostly, but that's somewhat of a general basis of the challenges presented in this game. Anyway, after you collect a talisman at the end of the level, which is the main collectible throughout most of the game, you leave to enter the first hub world of the game, Summer Forest. Meanwhile, Ripto has taken over the castle of this hub world, and thus you must, as Spyro elegantly puts it,
I'll collect a few talismans, give Ripto the old hot foot, and be in Dragon Shores by lunchtime.
And you do just that. Anyways, you enter the second level of the game, Colossus, and it's here where we see the other thing that may also seem a bit minor nowadays, but really does add a lot of charm and personality to the many worlds of the game. And that's the cutscenes that play before and after the level that shows us both the conflict going on, as well as how things are resolved now after you've helped out the inhabitants. In this world, for example, the locals are dealing with a Yeti, and after you've left, we see that they're in peace. Or in this guy's case, he's in pieces. Anyway, right before you enter Idle Springs, you then talk to the scumbags of all scumbags, and that is Moneybags. Yeah, get used to this bear, people. He's in like most of the game, and he'll often charge you outrageous prices, especially when teaching you things like swimming and climbing, where it requires 500 gems in order to even require them. But don't worry, I'm absolutely positive he won't charge any higher than that. Foreshadowing. And by the way, remember what I was talking about earlier with backtracking? Well, here's already two good examples of that. One is if you played Idle Springs first, which I, unfortunately, as a kid did. You'll notice a pond at the very beginning of the level that has treasure and a secret tunnel down below. And at the start of Summer Forest, you may have noticed a secret water tunnel that'll lead to an orb. There are plenty of locations like that throughout the entire game, and most of the time they are pretty fun, if even sometimes a little too obvious, to find. And if you're thinking, but your majesty, can't you just collect as many gems as you possibly can in the whole world to learn swimming? Well, no. Even if you do the exploit and glimmer, it's still not enough. And on top of that, not only are the gems in places where you can swim too deep below, but because of that, sparks can't reach them. So inevitably, you're going to have to play one of these two levels before learning how to swim. And with what I mentioned earlier, going to Colossus first is a big rule of thumb. After you use swimming to enter the castle, you enter the level Hurricos, where... Okay, you remember me talking earlier about Tom Kenny at the beginning? Well, listen to this level's inhabitants and tell me if their voices sound even remotely familiar.
We've always had trouble with the gear grinders, but now they've set up force fields to separate us. If you can find diodes, you can use them to turn off the force fields.
It's SpongeBob. It's SpongeBob's voice coming out of him. I'm not even kidding. I'm really not against it necessarily. I just find it kind of funny and surreal. And in case you're wondering, SpongeBob aired about 6 months before this game hit store shelves. So by that point, kids around America would have already at least been somewhat well familiar with his voice. Kind of makes you wonder if he was recording for a new episode of SpongeBob while recording for these guys at the same time. Actually, come to think of it, I wonder what that must have been like.
Look, guys, I know you need me for this, but I'm also in the middle of recording for SpongeBob. I mean, seriously, do you know how hard it is for me to do a voice that sounds like me if I got kicked real hard in the friggin' testicles? I mean, unless you want to pay me extra for this, then I simply just can't do it. Well, how about we pay you the equivalent to the amount dear old Moneybags charges Spyro throughout the entire game? Really? And by your estimate, how much would that be, essentially?
Well, he is in 70% of the game, and he charges $500 just for opening doors and extending bridges, so... Let me do the math here. Here's the estimate.
Good God! I mean, I'll take the money, but don't you guys think that haggling players like this is a bit much? Look, you're being paid to do your job, not to lecture us on right or wrong, okay? Fine, just let me finish recording for this next episode and I'll be over there soon. See ya.
Do you think he's just going to end up using his SpongeBob voice for the recording?
Oh, who cares? It's not like kids are going to catch on to that very quickly anyway.
Anyways, collect 6 talismans, complete the first speedway of the game, these in which also introduce hunter-based challenges, and fight the first boss, Crush. And this brings us to yet another major improvement over the first game, actual boss battles. Yeah. For one thing, they actually do present some form of challenge, especially if you're a young kid playing this for the very first time. And for another, they feel like they belong more organically with the progression of the game itself. You absolutely have to fight them to move on, for one. And given that they're a lot more fun than before, that's not really a bad thing at all. Take Crush, for example. Yeah, he's not hard per se, But unlike the quote-unquote boss battles in the first game, he not only takes twice as many hits to defeat, but his attack pattern, especially as you hit him more and more, becomes more aggressive. I know that should seem like common knowledge for boss battles, but trust me, after the first game, this feels like a huge breath of fresh air to have bosses that actually mean something, even from the most basic of requirements. After defeating him, you get yet another humorous cutscene between Spyro and Ripto, where after he calls him Shorty, he sicks Gulp after him. But because Gulp is a gluttonous pile of fuck, he can't quite squeeze his way through the door, and to avoid getting crushed by the roof, Ripto leaves and the castle is restored. That's another thing that not only makes this game great, but makes Ripto such a memorable antagonist, is that him and Spyro are, through a good chunk of the game, butting heads with each other leading up to the final boss, which, again, I'll elaborate more on that later. Meanwhile, in Autumn Plains, we see Moneybags being, well, Moneybags, when Ripto and Gulp show up behind him and scare him down the ladder where he finally dies. Nah, just kidding. But Ripto does end up taking over the castle in this world though. And thus, we partake in what is easily one of the frigging biggest and most vastly packed hub worlds to ever be put in a video game at the time. I mean, seriously, even playing it now, I can safely say that this place is freaking huge. There's a vast landscape, a giant castle to explore, a long glide from the tallest tower of the castle to make, and if you want a good idea of how high apple pie in the sky it is up there, just listen. That's wind. That's friggin' wind. I mean, not only is that an excellent little detail, but again, it makes this place feel all the more larger because of it. Anyways, after buying Climb for, once again, 500 gems, you explore the many other worlds in this place, and along with the hub already being pretty big, there's also 10 other worlds to this place, starting with Crystal Glacier and then moving on to fan favorite Skilos Badlands. You'll notice the inhabitants of these worlds look very similar to each other, almost like these worlds are sort of connected in different time periods. And while I do love Skilos Badlands, I feel as though Crystal Glacier is not only lots of fun as well, but feel like it gets often overlooked by fans purely because of Skilos Badlands. I mean, they both look beautiful and have fun challenges to boot, and the thing I do love a bit more about Crystal Glacier is not only how the inhabitants help you on your journey, but also the way they help you in freeing their leader in the most hilariously extreme of ways. Probably my favorite two worlds with a strange connection are Warring Worlds, Breeze Harbor, and Zephyr, with you essentially helping both sides. That is actually kind of messed up when you think about it. This world is also the only one that features 2 flight stages. Unfortunately, while they are fun, they have very sloppy laid out enemies. While they're not wild flight levels of bad, as the challenges themselves do make these stages worth playing, the one in Metro Speedway in particular involves you once again following Hunter, this time grabbing falling loot from presumably members of the Thievius Raccoonus, and the other from Icy Speedway where you water ski glide through 50 rings, which sounds basic on paper, but it's surprisingly fun in execution. It's not hard though, so don't let those stars discourage you. These overall do make the flight levels in this game all the more fun than in the previous game. So at this point, with all the constant praise that I've been giving this game, that you're probably wondering, does it even really do anything wrong per se? Well, some of the challenges are more annoying than others. And yeah, let's go ahead and take this time to mention the elephant in the room that you were all probably thinking since I started this review, the infamous Fracture Hills, specifically the Alchemist and Hunter missions. And while I, especially as an older, more experienced gamer, wouldn't say that they're infuriating now, looking back on them, they definitely aren't that fun either. The Alchemist mission in particular goes in a very specific, sporadic pattern where he'll often veer into a different direction at the very last second, thus leaving him more open to being attacked by the golems and having to do the whole thing all over again. Another one I personally find to be slightly more annoying than fun is the one where you have to secretly follow Agent Zero to his secret lair in Cloud Temples. I mean, it doesn't start off too bad at first, but it quickly gets kind of obnoxious at the final stretch when you have to find out the correct pattern and hiding positions in order to finally follow him into the hideout itself. And if he spots you, which granted the noise he makes is kind of funny, you have to do the whole thing all over again. It's not that hard, but kind of like the Alchemist mission, it's a bit more trial and error than fun. I mean, it could have been worse, all things considered, but it's really not too bad. But probably my least favorite mission of the whole game, in my opinion, goes to Hunter's Crystal Popcorn mission in Magma Cone. While I personally like the level as a whole, admittedly, the Hunter mission in this, mostly due to the way the camera is built in the cave that it's in, is way more annoying than fun, especially during the second time, where not only do they start popping up more frequently, which is already made kind of annoying due to the camera, but to make it even more annoying, Hunter almost always knows where a crap ton of them is bound to pop up, and he'll often have an advantage over you if you're not quick enough. Don't get me wrong, it's not that hard as an adult now, but I'd still be lying if I said I didn't fail at least once in a while at the second run, even as an adult. Like I said, the rest of the level is pretty good, but this one really drags it down for me. Anyway, you collect the remaining talismans in this hub world and then fight the big boy himself, Gulp, who not only takes more hits than Crush, obviously, but he can also be harmed only by an arsenal of different weapons brought to you by Pteranodon sent by Elora herself. I knew she was useful for something. Granted, they can be a bit tricky to use at first, particularly the bombs, but once you get it down, it feels incredibly satisfying, especially whenever you hit him. His impact to the ground actually causes you and everything around him to bounce in response. It's such a nice little detail. Anyways, as he's defeated, Ripto falls to his supposed fate. Also, by the way, where the fuck did he get the scepter? Elora comes to congratulate him with a temporary alternative to make up for him missing out on his vacation in Dragon Shores. Meanwhile, in Winter Tundra, we see that the professor has built a power crystal, or as I'm going to call it, convenient plot device for the final battle, which is further confirmed when Ripto is revealed to still be alive, big shock, and takes it as his means of building a new scepter in order to take over Avalar. From here, you play what is, honestly, my least favorite hub world of the game. Not only is it in many ways the smallest, but it also has only 5 worlds, including the aforementioned Cloud Temples. It's also here where you learn the final move, that being Headbass, which costs... What? 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 I am now convinced that this guy is a secret administrator of Trump Tower. Actually, that might even be too much of a low blow for Moneybags. Anyway, the final stretch of the game mostly plays out the same from here. While there are no more talismans to collect, you instead collect orbs at the end of levels alongside from doing the challenges inside of them. After you collected enough of them, you finally fight Ripto. And let me just say, after all is said and done, this is a truly epic final boss battle. For starters, the music! Secondly, the way the fight is done is not only super fun and creative, but it's also just so incredibly satisfying like the rest of them. Mostly. Basically, you have to collect 3 orbs of different varieties in order to damage him. Whichever final one you pick up will be the power that you use, but only for a short while, so use it wisely. And you also have to be quick to grab him, because Ripto can use them as well. Third, and most of all, this is a 3-phase battle. One with him, and then one with Robotic Gulp, and then finally one against him on top of a gigantic robotic Pteranodon. After beating him, in a bizarrely horrific way actually, and after a cute little go-by from Elora, topped off with a rather satisfying take back towards Moneybags, we finally leave for Dragon Shores, but not before partaking in once again that awesome end credits track. I think I'm having a nostalgic orgasm right now. After that, we finally enter Dragon Shores, funny enough, run by what I assume are reformed Norks, and after you've collected essentially everything in the game, or at least you may as well have, you not only enter the theme park, which is honestly kind of fun, but with collecting everything in the game, you get a permanent fireball upgrade. Yeah, remember what I was talking about in the last review about how the game had a more fun incentive for getting all the collectibles? Now, this might sound like a bit of a dumb question, but really think about it. What really is the benefit of collecting everything? Now, many would argue that considering how much stuff you have to collect in order to even enter, that they still consider it anyway. And you know what? That is a fair point. And I'm not really angry about it necessarily. In fact, funny enough, there's actually a cool little thing where if you start a new game with the previous save file, you actually can carry this power-up with you through your second playthrough, which is actually kind of cool. I just think it's mostly kind of pointless, especially in this day and age in gaming. Hell, even the reward you get for collecting all the tokens for playing the different attractions, which most of them are kind of fun, don't get me wrong, is the privilege of watching all the cutscenes of the game. Minus the level cutscenes, which was admittedly cool for the time, but now is just kind of an underwhelming final reward when you really think about it. While I still enjoy watching a lot of these cutscenes as they're a lot better than the first, I just don't really see them as that great of an incentive for getting everything, including all the tokens in Dragon Shores. And honestly, I think we can just go ahead and end it right here. Overall, this was frigging awesome. I still really love this game. In fact, it's one of the few games that I still have just as much fond memory playing now as an adult as I did almost 20 years ago. It's easy to see why this game was yet not only another big success for Insomniac, but is often considered by many to be one of the greatest video game sequels ever made. And not only that, but remains not only one of my favorite PS1 games ever made, but simply as one of my favorite games, period. And that's why I, King Gargantuous, give this game 9 glowing orbs out of 10. While the first game did its job fine for setting things right for the trilogy, this is the one that, in my honest opinion, perfected it. Sure, it might still not be 100% flawless, but with all the things it perfected from the last game as well as what it added, this game is still, for the most part, an absolute blast from beginning to end. So like I said, if you're interested in checking out the original trilogy and you want something truly great, this, and even the third game, which I'll get to that piece of awesome sauce later, are more or less the ideal choices for you. Get yourselves a vacation, take flight, and discover for yourselves. I'm King Gargantuous, and I'll see you all next time. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe to me if you want to see more videos like this. Follow me on Twitter at King Gargantuous if you want to know what I'm up to. And if you want to support videos like this plus the many other ideas that I have in the near future, be sure to support me on patreon.com/KingGargantuous. Thanks again guys, and I'll see you all next time.